Right, in this video, we're going to talk about industrial location with a special focus on Alfred Weber's least cost theory. So, industrial location is basically asking the question, why do businesses and manufacturers choose to locate where they do? So, obviously, there's a lot of different factors that went into it. Factors related to land and labor and agglomeration and the amount of money within an area. Um, and also factors related to transportation. And specifically today, we're going to look at some of these situation factors with Weber's model of industrial location of least cost. Um, so, uh, basically, a question to ask ourselves as we look at this is the industry raw materials oriented in terms of where the cost of transportation lies? Or does it cost more to transport the finished product? And that's going to help us decide where manufacturing is more likely to take place. So as we look at situation factors, we're going to look at transportation advantages related to kind of the raw materials of a good that it takes to create a good, the shipping of it, and then the infrastructure that exists to get your product to where it needs to go or to market. So specifically, we're going to look at Weber's least cost theory. This is what it usually looks like. This is called a locational triangle. And the gist of this is it's a very pared down, very simplified version of this model where you have two main raw materials in an individual market. And you're essentially thinking, where does the factory need to be within this locational triangle to be the most cost effective? So to have the least cost, I guess, hence the name least cost theory. So it doesn't make sense to locate the factory closer to the market, or does it make sense to locate the factory closer to the raw materials, kind of in the middle, or does it make sense to locate the factory kind of closer to one of the raw materials that might have higher transportation costs? So you're thinking about transportation costs, and you're thinking ultimately about where it makes sense. What is the most cost productive location? All right. So a little wonky in terms of of the writing here, but essentially you're going to have two main categories. In these kind of center blobs we see here are the factories, and then these are the markets here. Um, so with bulk reducing goods, you are going to locate the factories closer to the raw materials than you do the market, because these goods are um, potentially it costs more to transport the raw materials than it does the finished product. So it's just sort of whittled down from the beginning, and you end up having a lighter output and um, as you get to the market. And the opposite side of the coin are called bulk gaining materials. So these are things where the weight accumulates, and it actually costs more to transport the finished product to the market than it does the raw materials. So these are more likely to be closer to the market. So thinking back at our locational triangle, bulk gaining materials are more likely to be down here closer to the market, where you don't want to transport whatever you're making long distances after it's already been assembled or manufactured. And bulk reducing are more likely to be closer to the top of the, or to the double-ended side of a triangle, right? Our locational triangle. All right, so let's focus in a little bit more on each of these. So raw materials oriented or bulk gaining industries, obviously, like we said, where the inputs weigh more than the final product. So weight is lost during the production process. Therefore, it makes more sense economically to ship the final product longer distances than the raw materials. The way that I think of these are raw materials oriented kind of manufacturing. So copper, steel, lumber, sort of your bigger raw materials type industries are going to be here. So here's an example of this, the steel industry. And you can see, not surprisingly, most of the processing that takes place or the manufacturing that takes place is very, very close to the raw materials themselves, right? We're not transporting, we don't kind of the idea that you don't want to transport large amounts of coal and bituminous coal and iron ore long distances, right? So we have these sort of steel mills that are sort of triangulated in between the raw materials. And on the flip side, bulk gaining industries are more market oriented. So um, like we said, the finished product weighs more than the inputs, and the cost of shipping the outputs to the market is greater than the cost of shipping the raw materials. So weight is gained during the production process. So the classic example for this is bottling, right? Bottling beer, kind of sodas. Ultimately, the thing that weighs the most are the bottles, right? So you're going to or kind of the finished product with the bottles and the thing inside of and whatever's inside of them. So you don't want to spend a lot of time or money, as much time or money, sort of shipping long distances, uh, these sort of heavier things, or you get higher transportation costs. Therefore, you tend to see um, kind of bottling or breweries spread fairly evenly throughout the country. I mean, I always think back at the day that the kind of Coca-Cola bottling plants you had a lot of in even smaller towns had their own sort of Coca-Cola bottling plant that did a lot of the local um, manufacturing. So, and even today, when we think about how soda is produced in fast food restaurants, the manufacturing of the soda takes place in the restaurant itself, right? You have the syrup that's purchased by the restaurant, and then carbonated water is added as an input, and then you as a customer, you go up and you get your Orange Crush or your Barks root beer or whatever, and press the button, and then it sort of makes it there for you on the spot, right? So that is a hyper example of a kind of bulk gaining and kind of trying to, but that makes sense, right? Because you already have kind of a pre-existing infrastructure for that, and if you just buy the syrups, you can do a lot of that on the spot. So similarly, kind of the ways that breweries and Coca-Cola plants and bottling plants have spread out throughout the years, we see sort of similar thinking back in the 1800s and 1900s as they were setting up that industry. And another example of this is automobiles, which is a little bit different because ultimately automobiles are a little bit easier to transport at the end if you want to sort of drive, once you assemble the whole product, you can sort of drive it to wherever you want to. But ultimately, the cost of shipping large parts of it way more than kind of the smaller individual parts, right? So we tend to see automobiles as a more market-oriented industry as well. All right. So last thoughts, market-oriented or bulk gaining products going to be closer to market. Bulk reducing raw materials oriented going to be closer to the raw materials. All right. Thanks.